And Glenn Greenwald joins me now. Glenn, another bombshell revelation in many ways, one that you could argue, if it had come at the start, could have caused even more a kerfuffle than your original stories. Why is it so serious? Tell me about X-Keyscore in a simple way that explains why you think this is such a serious situation.
First of all, Piers, the databases that this program accesses is storing 40 billion internet records every 30 days, essentially trying to store into its systems all emails, all online chats, all internet browsing that it can possibly get its hands on. An incredible power to vest in the state. But then on top of that, the program is designed to, as it says, collects, quote, nearly everything a user does on the internet. So it allows an analyst sitting at his or her desk with no oversight, nobody watching over their shoulder, be able to enter an email address, enter an IP address, use keywords, and then pull up the content of emails, people's browsing history, what websites they've gone to, what Google searches they've entered, what kind of Microsoft Word documents they've sent, essentially the entire range of activities that people engage in on the internet. It's intended to be a ubiquitous spying tool, and that's what it's been constructed into.
Now, I want to play what Jay Carney at the White House said about this in today's briefing.
Allegations of widespread, unchecked analyst access to NSA collection data are false. Access to all of NSA's analytic tools is limited to only those personnel who require access for their assigned tasks. And there are multiple technical, manual, and supervisory checks and balances within the system to prevent those who don't have access from achieving that access.
I mean, I suppose my reaction to that when I heard it was, well, it's all very well, but Edward Snowden wasn't exactly high-ranking, and yet he managed to easily access all this stuff. So almost by default you would say, well, that can't be true. There must be loads of people that can access this stuff.
Right. I mean, Edward Snowden was not only able to access it, he was authorized to access it. He was trained on how to use this program, which is why he had the documents that he was able to give us and tell us all about the program and his experiences with it. You're talking about thousands and thousands of people, not just people employed directly for the NSA, but also people who are employed at private contractors who are then deployed to the NSA, like Mr. Snowden. And what's most disturbing about it, Piers, is they can sit at their desk and there's no pre-search approval process. Not even a supervisor within the NSA before the search is processed looks at what they're doing, let alone a court, which means that they're completely free to engage in all kinds of unconstrained searches. There are legal limits on what they can do when it only involves a U.S. person, although lots of U.S. persons' communications are in these databases, but there's no technological constraint and no real after-the-fact robust auditing process, and there's all kinds of evidence now emerging because of these disclosures of abuse. There's lots of proof in history that if you allow this kind of surveillance without limits, it'll be wildly abused, and I think that's why even in Washington these stories are now making such an impact.
Glenn, stay with me. I want to bring in now James Risen. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for the New York Times. He knows all about questions of the NSA and freedom of the press. A federal appeals court has ruled he must testify in the government's case against Jeffrey Sterling, a former CIA official charged with leaking secrets about a CIA effort to disrupt Iran's nuclear weapons program. He can't discuss specifics of that ongoing case. Also joining me is CNN senior legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin. James Risen, what do you make of his latest exposure by Glenn Greenwald via Edward Snowden in terms of the kind of data that we're talking about?
Well, I think it's a really interesting story, and it adds to kind of a mosaic that's developed that shows the extent of the NSA's growth as a kind of the infrastructure of the surveillance state that's grown really since 9/11. I think this is all an extension of what began under the Bush administration and then was kind of codified in the FISA Amendments Act in 2008 and the Patriot Act. And you're seeing kind of the growth from there in all directions of the exploitation of what they call in Silicon Valley big data.
Jeffrey Toobin, how shocked should people be? Because on the one hand, the public will go, oh my God, this is outrageous. At the same time, anyone's wallet, when they bring out all their credit cards or their shopping details, anything online, you sort of, if you think about it, you're already giving up a lot of information that we should be shocked about now.
And things are read. I mean, if I send you a Gmail, from my personal account to your personal account, and I say, let's play golf this weekend, Google will read that email and try to sell me golf clubs. So, you know, automatically. A lot of what's gone on is that kind of automatic.
But the difference here, though, is that you have authorized analysts, and according to Glenn Greenwald, thousands potentially, who can do more than that. They can actually get into this.
I'd like to ask Glenn a question about this program. Is this for just domestic emails, or is this for international emails, or both?
And the reason is that under the law, in order for the NSA to eavesdrop, to target an American citizen for surveillance, they need first to go to the FISA court and get approval. And of course, the FISA court always gives it their rubber stamping court. But even for international calls, when an American citizen talks to somebody outside of the United States, those emails, those telephone calls, that activity is completely accessible by the NSA without a warrant. And on top of that, the NSA makes mistakes all the time. It's very difficult to know what the national origin is of communication. So all kinds of purely domestic calls get put into this database as well. And so, as the ACLU's Jamil Jaffer said in our piece, huge numbers of Americans' communication are swept up even by what the NSA calls foreign surveillance.
But I think, Glenn's, this is an important clarification that this is primarily targeted at international emails, not purely domestic emails. Now, as Glenn points out, there may be mistakes, there may be a lot of excess.
But we have to trust people here, right? I mean, we have to trust thousands of people that they're not going to abuse it. Edward Snowden, some would say abused it, others would say blew the whistle, but he had access to this and put it in the public domain. Somebody with a more malicious mind who happens to have that authorization could cause serious damage, Jeffrey.
You can't. The other thing, though, is you can't separate out.
I'm sorry, James.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You can't separate out domestic from international that cleanly, and that's one of the kind of statements that the Obama administration has made repeatedly, that they can make these clean kind of divides, and that's just not true.
What was really interesting today, I thought, was the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, released 3 previously classified documents about the government's bulk collection programs. I mean, that to me, Jeffrey Toobin, says that they are moving to a more transparent world, and the only reason they're doing that is because of Edward Snowden and Glenn Greenwald.
Well, it's certainly true that it is good that there has been public discussion of this, and that's a good thing. And look, my hat's off to Glenn for investigative reporting. I still think Edward Snowden is a criminal and should not have done what he did, but I do think this discussion we're having is a good thing.
We wouldn't be having this discussion if it wasn't for him.
That's true.
Why do you think? I mean, that's the thing I don't understand about the climate in Washington these days, is that people want to have debates on television and elsewhere, but then you want to throw the people who start the debates in jail.
But tell me this, James, because I mean, you've been involved with this a long time. Here's the dilemma that I face when I just studied this. As a journalist all my life, I'm looking at this and thinking, this is brilliant investigative journalism by Glenn. When it comes to Edward Snowden, I'm asking myself, where does the line get drawn? What you can't have is a license for every single person that has access or authorization to classified material just spewing it into the public ether on a whim. You can't have that. So with modern technology being all-encompassing, where do you draw the line?
What part of this don't you want to talk about?
I wonder
which document that's come out don't you want to talk about?
I suppose it's the specifics of some of the programs. Do you feel comfortable as an American citizen that the enemy potentially knows too much about what the American government can and can't do?
I can tell you, I've been an investigative reporter for a long time, and almost always the government says that when you write a story, it's going to cause damage, and then they can never back it up. They say that about everything, and it's like the boy who cried wolf. It's getting old.
But isn't it also?
Piers, can I address that? Hey, Piers.
Yeah, Glenn.
Let me just say one word about Mr. Snowden. There are ways that if you have access to classified information, you could just spew it out all into the ether, which is the phrase that you used. He could have uploaded it onto the internet en masse, He could have sold it to a foreign adversary. He could have passed it to a foreign government. He could have given it to WikiLeaks and asked them to just publish it all. He did none of that. He came to established media organizations and said, please be extremely careful and judicious. Go through these documents, publish only what is in the public good that my fellow citizens should know about, and withhold the information that could cause harm. And that's what we've done.
Glenn, he's now gone to China, and then he's gone to Russia, two of the most repressive countries in the world, and you don't think they now have access to all that material? He somehow kept it secret from them?
No, they don't, Jeffrey. And the reason he had to go to Russia and China is because the United States is filled with Jeffrey Toobins who want to take people who come forward and bring transparency to the government and throw them into a cage for decades and disappear them from our public discourse.
That's right. And he wants to go to China,
in the United States.
And he wants to go to China and Russia, which are beacons of freedom. Hong Kong, right, which is independent of China.
Right.
Come on. I mean, come on.
The reason
Glenn.
that he's there, Jeffrey, is not because he thinks they're beacons of freedom. The reason he's there is because, as Daniel Ellsberg said in an op-ed in the Washington Post 2 weeks ago, the United States is no longer a safe place for whistleblowers, and that therefore, said Mr. Ellsberg, he was absolutely right to leave the United States because it's the only way that he could participate in the debate that he started and avoid persecution in the United States, which is what happens to whistleblowers. He's in Hong Kong and Russia because he thinks it's their lovely societies.
Okay, let me give the final word to James Rice here, because, James, again, I would simply say to you this. Is there a limit, though? Is there a limit to what kind of material people with the kind of access that Edward Snowden had should be allowed to put out there before it crosses a line?
Oh, of course. There's always limits on that, and that's one of the things that you do as a reporter, as Glenn was just discussing, is you kind of make those decisions as you go along. All I'm trying to say is that the government always likes to say that huge national security damage is being done, and then, then they can never really prove that. The Republic has lasted for over 200 years with a free press, and it's just, all I know is that every time I've done stories like this, they say that I've caused enormous damage to the country, and then nothing happens.